So welcome to our webinar this morning. My name is Deborah Jackson and I'm the chaplain at Hereford Sixth Form College. So whether you're a student at the college or you're from the wider community, I want to welcome you. This webinar is part of the second series of conversations with international and local Christian leaders about how we can respond to racial and social injustice. The series is hosted by local Anglican churches and is led by Sixth Form Governor Revd Kina Robertshaw, who is also local associate minister at St Peter's, Bromyard. Kina is a renowned international speaker and a passionate advocate for racial and social justice. She visited the college back in October last year for Black History Month and spoke about racism in the church and the wider society. And today she'll be talking to John Pratt, who is one of the directors of study here at Hereford Sixth Form College and is lead teacher on inclusion and diversity. And he also shares Kina's passion for justice. But before I hand over to Kina and John, I want to start with a prayer. God, we know that there is terrible injustice in this world, and we're sorry for the part that we have played in failing to change this. Please be with us now, so that through this conversation, we would be changed, and as a result, the world also. Amen.
Amen.
So, John, and thank you, John and Kina, thank you so much for coming this morning, and I'll hand over to you.
John, many thanks for joining us, and thanks to Deborah for that introduction. John, could you tell us what legacy of Black Lives Matter, what's the legacy on the college, and how has it impacted the college? Thank you.
Has only really been a sort of a part of a movement which has been sort of, you know, morphing and changing shape and changing name for many years. So I think conversations have been taking place for a very long time, haven't they? But certainly I felt that within my lifetime, which is 50 years, you know, I noticed something very different really during the Black Lives Matter protests. And it was amazing to see so many young people, so many of our students at the college taking place in a really peaceful, respectful, dignified protest in Hightown and Hereford during that time. So I think really the short answer to your question about the legacy is, well, really it's a conversation, and it's a deeper conversation than we've been able to have before. And I think just looking at some of the responses from students, students of colour and students who are white, the passion that they're feeling, I think that's in short the legacy of Black Lives Matter. For the future, it's essential that we continue those conversations. We've started the conversation now, and you very kindly came in, Kina, and held you know, a workshop with students in Black History Month, which is October. And I think the important thing, and the absolutely crucial thing, is that we keep that conversation going. That it isn't just something that happens in Black History Month or something that happened at the height of the protest, that this is a conversation that we keep on having. And hopefully this is part of that process today.
Fantastic. John, someone might be listening or they might watch later, and if they say, why not all lives matter? Why Black Lives Matter? Why not all lives matter?
Gosh, well, that's a really good question, Kina. And I have to say, I was on holiday. We had a very brief holiday when we were allowed to travel, and I did see somebody with a T-shirt on. We passed them in the street, and they said, "Ginger lives matter." Okay, and we were horrified. It wasn't appropriate to stop that person and challenge them, but it was horrible to see, because I think it was a direct snub, if you like, to these sort of conversations, and a direct challenge to this way of thinking. And the reality of racism in our society is that whiteness is just more powerful, and we as white people, we do share a privilege. and it's impossible for racism against us to be on anywhere near the same scale and have anywhere near the same impact as racism against people of colour. I mean, I'll think of an example from the news. I mean, there's loads of different things in the news. Labour's Diane Abbott. Now, you may not like her politics. You may think she's a hopeless politician, but I hope that we can judge her on those grounds. You might support her politics, but you know, really, that's the crucial factor that we need to keep in mind whenever we talk about Diane Abbott and those people on Twitter who may disagree or agree with her politics. Perhaps on Twitter, they might say something about her politics, not about the colour of her skin or about her body shape or about the fact she's a female politician. And she has made, in fact, you can see this on YouTube, she's made a very, very moving speech about how she has been the subject to consistent abuse. And she said that the word that comes up over and over again in virtually every criticism that she gets on Twitter is the N-word. And it is clearly racist. Now, we as sort of, you know, kind people, we think that that's horrific. But what happened actually in response to that is that she did not get the chorus of support from celebrities, from other politicians, from other writers, from other Twitter users in support of her challenging the racism. And instead what happened was that there was a massive response about, well, white people are victims of racism too. And the conversation changed. It changed away from her as a female politician of colour experiencing racism and sexism. The conversation went from that and the injustice that it obviously represents to one about sort of a discussion about sort of, you know, people, you know, white people being victims of racism equally, and that simply is not the case. I think, you know, certainly when I was doing my my degree, there was a young A-level student, Stephen Lawrence. People of my age and a bit younger will remember him, and I hope A-level students will remember him as well, or certainly know the name. He was killed in a racist attack while waiting for a bus with his friend. When the police arrived, the police accused his friend of being involved in drugs, and there was suspicion that he was somehow implicated. But sadly, Stephen died as a result of his injuries, and it took 19 years after his death, really, for only 2 of the 5 racist attackers to be jailed. And out of that came a massive report about institutional racism. And institutional racism isn't the overt racism, using the sort of words that I've just alluded to now. But institutional racism is where racism is sort of woven into the very fabric of an organisation. And in this case, it was the police. So that was one of the stages of this conversation that I mentioned earlier. But I think to say all lives matter, well, of course they do, but this is an opportunity now to really think, to really reflect, and to pause and to think of a way out of this system where racism is woven into so much of what we do and what there is in society. So I've gone on a bit there, Kina, but I think that's my answer, is basically racism against people of colour is something that needs to be tackled in society and has more potential impact.
Thank you very much, John. That's a very helpful answer. I just want to take you back. Can you just elaborate a bit more? What do you mean about whiteness is more powerful? Can you just talk a bit about that? Can you just, I'm sure there might be, yeah, I'm just wondering, or maybe you could give me an example of where you see that actually whiteness is more powerful.
There's so many things, without wanting to go into a whole sociology lesson there, really. But you know, virtually every aspect of life, I think, people of colour are disadvantaged. And so, for example, in the education system, there's been studies that when 11-year-olds do their SATs in school, that black children are actually marked lower by their teachers than when the same papers are anonymous. When those papers are anonymised, the marks go up when the teachers don't know that those children are black. When or if they get to university, something like 70% of university professors are white men. And this was something that is horrific, I think, or certainly very concerning statistic, that 30% of Britain's black men are on the national DNA database as a result of stop and search. So I think whenever black people try to raise these issues and try to start a conversation about racial injustice, they are shouted down on social media in the way that I've just described. Another example, for example, only 6 out of 92 football managers are black and non-white, and yet something like a quarter of all professional football players are non-white, and yet any kind of discussion about trying to get more black football coaches again was shot down in flames, and the supporters were derided again on social media. So whiteness, well, I think there is a question of privilege. The privilege comes in all sorts of different ways. As a man, I have privilege. As a white man, I have privilege. Okay, and that means that basically as a result of our colonial history, structures exist across the whole of society that means that people of colour are disadvantaged compared to people like me, white people, and that's just simply as a result of our skin. We know that in society the odds are stacked against people of colour in all sorts of different ways. I mentioned education, I mentioned the criminal justice system, even sport. We know that it's only really recently that there's become more positive representations of black people in the media, on TV and in films. And that's a relatively recent thing. Certainly when I was growing up in the 1970s, black men particularly were portrayed as criminals. And some of the newspapers used to run stories about the black mugger, for example. So people of my age have grown up with those sort of messages for a very long time. Hopefully those messages are changing, but I think we've still got a long way to go.
Thank you, John. John, as an educator, what are you as a college doing to ensure that Black Lives Matter and the Black History Month continues? These conversations, what are you doing as a college?
Well, the reality is, Kina, unfortunately, it's been so much harder this year because of COVID. And usually we've got a fantastic extracurricular program, which is managed by one of our teachers, Marco, and it's extremely good, and it really gets students thinking. And like I said, this conversation would have absolutely fitted into that program, and to get students thinking. The debate society, for example, brilliant. There's a really interesting and important debate at the moment about freedom of speech, and it's those sort of things where, like I say, it's an opportunity for us to pause and to think and to really confront racism. It's just so much harder to do when we're on Teams. We've seen all the technical problems that we've had this morning, and just it's not the same, is it, when we're not sat in a room together? That's so much better and more rewarding. So we are trying to do some things. We've included things in our tutorial program, so all students will have had access to some of those conversations. I think, though, the next move forward is that we must continue to allow these conversations to develop. So I mentioned tutorial and the debate society, when that can restart, but also I think it's really important that we listen to students, to all students, any student who wants to be anti-racist, and especially students of colour. And I suppose if the death of those in custody recently has to mean anything at all and to bring about any kind of lasting change, then I think it is important that we start to confront the racism at every corner of society, including around us at college.
Interesting. When I visited your college, the college in October last year, it was a month of Black Lives History, and George Floyd's stuff had just happened the previous few months. I had one of the students, she was a white, coming to me that I'm disappointed. Coming back to college, I thought the college would be interested at all to talk about George Floyd's, the experience and what happened. Apparently there was nothing, there was no talk, there was nothing that happened. And I think for me that really spoke a lot. And, you know, there's a young person who's really interested, who has a heart for social injustice and racism, and comes to college where it just feels like nothing happened. So I'm glad to hear that there's things that in place, or the things that you're planning to be doing. And what's interesting, it's not a Black person, it wasn't someone from ethnic minority, it was a white student coming to me saying, we're not talking about it, there's no space to talk about that.
Yes, no, I'd agree absolutely, Kina, and you know, unfortunately, that is the legacy of COVID, I think, to a degree. I think there's a couple of things. I think COVID is part of the issue. You know, everything has just been on lockdown. Students are on, you know, if they are in college, then there's no opportunities to do any kind of extracurricular. There's no, well, exactly like that student mentioned, you know, there's no space really to have these conversations other than online. So, and which is why, you know, it was so great that you could come to the college and get this conversation going. I think I know that teachers try and refer to regards, which are the protected characteristics, in their lessons, and wherever possible, teachers will try and refer to race, to ethnicity, to age, gender, disability, sexual orientation. So these protected characteristics are something which hopefully we can weave through the sort of everything that we do. But yeah, you're right. You know, we just simply have not been able to, unfortunately, in response to George Floyd's death, we've just not been able to have the sort of vibrant debate that we would normally have.
Yeah, thanks. Talking about teachers, do you think might some teachers have a racist bias, and what can we do? What can you do about that? I'll give you an example of why I'm saying this is my daughter was at a college, which I'll not mention which college. It was an independent college, sixth form. In her first week at college, this is her first week at college, sixth form, she was predicted by one of her teachers, D's or C, and then says, this is what I predict you. If you can do better than this, I don't know. And that spoke to me a lot. Why would you, as a teacher, predict a student in her first week of college? And what I took from there is maybe because of her color. She was new at this college, has this one of her teachers walk to her, actually telling her, this is what you're going to do if you work hard, maybe. But so can you say something about teachers with racist bias? What can we do about that?
Yeah, I think that's a really complicated question, but absolutely crucial, isn't it, to all of this? And especially I refer back, you know, to saying that people of my age, when we were growing up, representation of Black people, the messages that we were getting about Black people as white people, the messages we were getting was all negative. So we live, like I say, in a racist society. So I think it's true to say that at the same time, we all have biases. We do all have biases. And I think it's essential that we consider moving forward that we confront those biases, whatever they may be. And there is, we will, and again, we were hoping to do this year, but unfortunately weren't able to because of COVID. But we will, when things get back to some sort of normality, we will, as a staff body, look at unconscious bias training. And those sort of training activities are really, really powerful and important, and hopefully help people pause and reflect and think of a positive way forward. It is challenging to consider our own unconscious biases, but I think that in order to confront those, that's really the only way that we can move forward and bring about any change. I'd like to think, well, certainly I have absolutely never come across any teacher who's expressed any kind of racist view or any kind of racist inclination at college. Of course. And I'd like to believe that my colleagues are as committed as I am, really, to a sense of justice. However, we know, don't we, that these unconscious biases exist, and we need to, myself included, we all need to think about, well, what are those biases? How can we overcome them? Where do they come from?
Thank you. Having said that, I must say this about Hereford Sixth Form. I'm not saying this to kind of may say Hereford Sixth Form is, better than other colleges. So my daughter moved to Hereford Sixth Form College, and when she got there, it was amazing that one of the teachers, I won't mention her name, literally took time, and I don't know whether it's seeing the potential in her, not judging her for color. And this teacher, one of the teachers, just basically encouraged and supported my daughter. And as a result, she got A's and then ended up in Oxford. She's now studying at Oxford. So you see the difference. There's a teacher, you're not seeing a person because of their color, you're actually seeing possibly what they can achieve with support and help. So I'd like to say thank you you've got a great staff, great teachers, and thank you for that.
That's so thank you.
Yeah, just looking at time, I just want to ask you, do you think colonial history should be taught in schools?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, of course. No doubt about that. I know that I'm not a historian, so I can't speak with any kind of authority really on the history curriculum at school. I do know from just reading the papers really that there's been a debate, for example, in Wales at the moment about how history is taught and how Welsh history is taught. And I know that there's a lot of conversations there about how there has been no acknowledgement of, for example, the any part of the UK's acknowledgement in the colonial system, but especially Wales's. So, for example, it's only really recently, despite the fact that I've grown up on the Welsh borders, that I knew anything about the contribution that the Welsh wool industry in mid Wales, rural mid Wales, which you expect to be a million miles away from colonialisation, but actually they supplied the cloths, the clothes that slaves wore.
Wow.
So in a direct way, rural mid Wales contributed to the slave industry, and it's that acknowledgement, I think, that the power of learning about history has. It sort of confronts us. It makes us confront sort of, well, what has our history really been about? And it's only until we do that, again, like I keep on saying, it's only until we do that that we can move forward really as a society and bring any kind of justice.
Thanks. Finally, my final question, how can we help, the people who might be shocked by actually we've been part of this racist system? How can we help those people? Maybe they want to make contribution and, they want to make a difference. How can they be helped?
Well, I think that, well, like I said, it's going back to unconscious bias. We've all got unconscious bias, but I think even just acknowledging that and talking about racism and white privilege is a really good start. And there's, one of the key messages that came out of George Floyd's death and the Black Lives Matter movement is that we need to start confronting everyday racism. But in order to do that, we need to educate ourselves. And there are some fantastic books actually, like Why I Stopped Talking to White People About Race and White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. And there are some excellent books out there which do, it's a black voice, it's black writers explaining really how racism operates within a society and how our defensiveness can also be a barrier to challenging racism. And I think I mentioned there Robin DiAngelo, she's the one who wrote White Fragility. I think one of the things that she says there is the reason why people get defensive is because this enormous realization and then the ensuing sense of guilt that they feel. And that can sort of really put people back on the defensive. And then, my response to that would be, well, we need to kind of get over that, I have to say, because that's the reality. That is the reality of people's lives. That's the reality of people's lives over the past few hundred years, and it continues now. So for us to be defensive, well, we've got the privilege to be defensive, frankly, but we need to confront things, and that's the only way that things can change.
Thank you very much, John. It's been wonderful talking to you. We'll now have our questions and answers, but thank you so much for your time. And I'm sure a lot of people find that helpful. So Deborah, are you ready for questions?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you both so much for that really thought-provoking conversation. And I'd like to start off with a question that's been submitted by one of the students from the college. And the question is, how do you think we can create greater solidarity and education around race issues here in Hereford? What might be the first step?
Shall I start, Kina?
Yes, please, John. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think hopefully we've started it, despite everything, despite all the difficult circumstances we're in at the moment, and sitting in our own living rooms and trying to do everything via Zoom and Teams. So I think hopefully we've at least started that, and it is about taking little steps. I mentioned earlier that I'd like to see this becoming part of our extracurriculum program, and I know Marco Martinelli, who manages the extracurricular program and the Debate Society, does a fantastic job of bringing together people like Kina, other speakers, to just challenge us, to get us to see things from a different perspective. We've tried through the tutorial program this year to do sort of, if you like, a series of online assemblies that the personal tutors deliver. One of those, for example, was a fantastic video, and again, it's just something to sort of challenge us. But as part of the assembly, the tutorial assembly, there was a short video from BBC Three, and it was things. And it's a series of little films of what not to say. And one of the things, one of the videos which we incorporated in this tutorial, which was specifically about challenging racist stereotypes and thinking critically about the messages that we're getting in the media. But one of the things, this film that we included was what not to say to a black woman. And it's really horrific. I mean, it was done in a very, they were brilliant, very, very amusing. But some of the things that these women hear all the time as part of their lives, we need to be aware of that, and we need to challenge ourselves over that and challenge each other. So I suppose the short answer is it's a work in progress. I'd like to think that we started taking those steps. I think really what I want to do, and what, the reason why I was so keen to do this was because I want students to tell me what we need to do. So, and in a way, you're the experts, you're digital natives, you're bombarded with more messages, more images than at any point in human history. And so in many respects, you've become almost experts of what the modern world is like. And therefore you need to tell us, I'm of a generation, like I say, that grew up at a very different time. Hopefully things have changed a little bit from them, but I think that I need to learn from you. So you need to tell us. And I'd love to work together with students when we can, physically in a room, sharing ideas, and hopefully having a bit of a laugh as well.
Fantastic.
Thank you, John. Kina, do you have anything to add?
Exactly, I would agree with everything that John has said. I think for me, the most important thing, creating a safe space without judging each other, speaking in grace and love.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. So can we move on to another question? And this one is about social media. So the question is, how can we combat racial abuse that takes place on social media when it happens so covertly? And how can we actively promote anti-racism through our social media networks? It's a difficult issue, isn't it?
It is.
That is, yeah, it is a difficult issue, but we can only do our part. Let me do my part. And again, for me, why am I doing this? I could choose to be silent, but I chose to actually speak, do my part. Hopefully by my example, I could have an impact and influence someone. So you can only do your part. You demonstrate what it is to live in a society that is equal and that is loving. That's all you can do. Do your part and show that example of being anti-racist.
I think that's a really important point, isn't it? And I think there's loads of things that I think we could do, but we've got to be careful, especially when you're young. And and I have to say, if you're female as well, sometimes, unfortunately, we know that the responses on social media haven't always been good. So we do need to look after ourselves, and that's very, very important. However, at the same time, certainly there are things you can do on social media to directly challenge instances of any kind of hate speech. So, for example, on Twitter, there's a really good report function. Twitter's been criticised for not responding quickly enough. However, that's beyond our control in a way. And like Kina said, we can only do what we can do. But certainly reporting any kind of hate speech or any kind of racism, sexism, homophobia, whatever, on social media, I think that's an easy win. You can easily do that. And at least if nothing else, then social media platforms then investigate, okay? And it sends a message out. And sometimes it can, they can obviously ban accounts, as we've seen. And so, there are stories of, those who espouse hate speech on social media have been banned. So that's been a good thing. I think talking to us, certainly if you're a student at the college, I think talking to us is well, hopefully you'd find that helpful. So talk to your personal tutor, talk to me and Helen, the directors of studies, or talk to any member of the wellbeing team. So Deborah, the counsellors, Rosie, and student wellbeing. So you can talk to any one of us really, or any other member of staff actually, about something that you've seen or heard on social media. If you've been the victim of hate speech directly, or one of your friends have, then I'd definitely be interested in talking to you about that, because we have quite a lot of experience of working with the police and negotiating with you at every step along the way. So it's not something that we just frog march you into talking to the police. It's something that we negotiate together. I think the broader issue of social media, I think if we can educate ourselves, and like I said, I mentioned a couple of books there which have been fantastic half-term reading for me, but also there are all sorts of things on BBC at the moment. For example, there's an alt history series of short films which are amazing, which do talk about sort of Britain's racist history. So there are things like that which can help us, which can empower us to do two things. I suppose the first thing is to think critically about what we see and read online. And there's loads of evidence apparently that if we think critically, given that we're bombarded with information, we actually feel a bit happier, and it's a well-being effect because we're able to feel a little bit more empowered. So we don't feel overwhelmed by a lot of nonsense that's on social media. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, of course, then we can challenge directly some of the things that are being said. So we know that there's a lot of fake news, and there are some fantastic fact-checking websites that you can use. And just by retweeting that sort of stuff, I think is really important. I think if you come across somebody like Diane Abbott, who is experiencing racism, sexism on social media, then I think just a tweet in support of her. It's as simple as that. Kindness and love. And I think a tweet in support of her, or a tweet which challenges some of the untruths that are said, and reporting, I think that's probably the three things.
So this is a question, slightly different aspect. So a question submitted that says, people claim that that people are playing the race cards, and there are lots of other issues that are lumped together with race. And the question is asking, how can we tackle the real racism without it being diluted by the other problems?
Wow. Yeah, it's really hard for me as a woman of color to think of people who will be playing racism why would you play? I know, well, I understand what that person might be saying, but for me, as a woman of color, to think that I'm playing it, that's a real hard thing for someone to think like that. The reality, we can't deny racism is there towards people of color. You cannot deny that. Yes, other people might be playing it, but the real truth, it's there, that we need to identify and acknowledge that it's there. And like John said, there's so many resources, there's so many stuff that could help us to see how we could support where racism is happening. To say, well, there's a lot of things that are being played, people are just maybe, overreacting. That's quite painful, that's quite hard. That's what I think.
John, would you like to add to that?
Well, do you know, I think my honest response is that it could even be racist to even say that they're playing the race card. And like we've heard from Kina, why would you do that? You know, there's got to be a reason for somebody to feel aggrieved. But to accuse somebody of playing the race card is just the ultimate, well, it seems to me, it's just the ultimate defensive response. Okay. And like I mentioned the book there, you know, White Fragility. I mean, you know, there is a privilege that white people have, and to shoot down any kind of discussion about the reason why they're aggrieved, to say, oh, well, you would say that, wouldn't you, because you're trying to play the race issue. I mean, that's what they describe Diane Abbott as an angry black woman obsessed by race.
Yeah.
You know, and that's one of the you know, one of the racist things that always happen is that, you know, black women aren't assertive, they're angry, for example. So I think to say, to play the race card, I would have problems with that. I would struggle to hear that from somebody.
So thank you. That takes us on to another question, which is, how can the college, and indeed society as a whole, create safe spaces for people to have these conversations without the defensiveness that you've referred to?
Can I start on that one?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, we would like to set up a space like this. I think at the moment we're going to set up a virtual space for it, and we're going to put an anonymous email. Sorry, it won't be anonymous. It'll be an email space for people to bring in their comments. Okay, so that would come to myself, and we're going to call it, well, we think we're going to call it Black Voice. Okay, now the word black obviously is a word that changes its meaning. The NUS have used that term, and they've set up something similar, which is an online forum for people to express their views. Okay, to bring, you know, any concerns that they may have about something that they've seen online, for example, like I said, any concerns that they may have about feeling unfairly treated, especially within college. So that's where I'd like to start with that. I don't know, Kina, if you've got anything that you think we need to do in college.
Yeah, I think it's making an opportunity where people know there is a platform, that it's there. When I need it anytime, I can access that without making it a big thing. Because some people, because once you've made a decision, most especially as a white person, if you want to be a voice, you know, speaking against racism, it's not an easy stand that you're going to be making. You will get criticized. You will get all sort of people maybe calling you names. So I guess if you can create something where someone can access that without making it loud to everyone, that's what I would suggest. And actually, even just these spaces, like when I was in college, one of the students says, well, can we just create a forum where we could talk about these things? It doesn't have to be a big thing, but knowing that what we share in here stays in here to support and just be a voice for the voiceless.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the college, you know, we have set up, well, in fact, students set this up. So, and again, I'd be really interested to hear what students have to say about this, but We've got an LGBT society in the college, which is enormous, really. There's over 40 students every year that join. And hopefully, I would like to suggest that that is a physical safe space for them to meet and be themselves, and to maybe talk things through and maybe talk about whether or not they need support. So that's something. We've also done something for students who've got Asperger's and on the autistic spectrum. And in fact, a student set up a club a few years ago, the Aspies Club. Himself having Asperger's, he felt that they needed this sort of safe space. So hopefully we've got a record of setting up these safe spaces, of facilitating them. I think for me to set up, a safe space as a white bloke who's 50, I'm not sure if it's right coming from me, but maybe from the students themselves, and that's certainly something that I would very much like to work to set up. The reality of the demography of Hereford is that the numbers of people who aren't white aren't very high, but in some respects, I'd say that it must be. Well, I can only imagine, but I wonder if it must be quite hard sometimes to feel that you're the only black face in a classroom of students. So I think, even though we don't have the numbers of people who are non-white in the college, I think having those safe spaces could even be more important than somewhere like in Birmingham or Cardiff or wherever. So yeah, so I think probably starting online, and let's see where we go. But I think it's important that students let me know one way or the other.
Good.
Thank you very much. Kina, do you want to add anything to that?
No, and also maybe the other thing, not to just limit it to the college, because now that we are online, we do things virtually. Connect with other people, connect with some other colleges in London, all over the country, bring those voices together so you can be a more powerful voice. So I think we shouldn't just limit it to space.
Yeah.
So let's see how we can collaborate with other institutions that are already talking about these issues.
That's an excellent idea, and I've noted that, Kina. Thank you.
Thank you. We could go on and we could talk about sort of the wider society, making a safe space in the wider society. I want to just draw our time to a close by asking you both, could you share just one thing that gives you hope for the future?
For me, what gives me hope is the thought and the belief that love never fails. If we start our conversations from a place of love, there is so much hope, because one thing we all know and we have in common is love. Love never fails. Love wins at the end of the day.
Certainly does. I like that. I mean, I was going to say that for me, it was just seeing the number of young people, and well, all ages, but especially young people. So I recognise so many students of the college in Hightown during the Black Lives Matter protest, and just the fact that students are coming forward wanting to talk about this, wanting to have these sort of conversations. I think that for me gives me enormous amounts of hope, because I know that they know that racism has to be combated, and I think that gives me an enormous sense of hope.
Thank you. Yes, I think young people are what give us the hope in this conversation, aren't they? So that seems like a good place to draw our conversation to a close, but we are planning more opportunities to continue this important discussion. So thank you for joining this webinar and for your questions. Thank you for our support crew working away behind the scenes. And thank you, most of all, to John and Kina for your wise, compassionate and thought-provoking words. So I want to wish you all a good rest of the day, and wherever you are, that you'll continue to be peaceful and safe and healthy. So goodbye.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you, Deborah. Thanks. Bye, John. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.